and decks had run red with blood. With the subsidence of the sea, we were able to go to work upon the damaged engines to some effect, and I also set men to examine the gravitation screen generators with a view to putting them in working order, should it prove not beyond our resources. For 2 weeks we labored at the engines, which indisputably showed evidence of having been tampered with. I appointed a board to investigate and report upon the disaster, but it accomplished nothing other than to convince me that there were several officers upon it who were in full sympathy with Johnson, for, though no charges had been preferred against him, the board went out of its way specifically to exonerate him in its findings. All this time we were drifting almost due east. The work upon the engines had progressed to such an extent that within a few hours we might expect to be able to proceed under our own power westward in the direction of Pan American waters. To relieve the monotony, I had taken to fishing, and early that morning I had departed from the Coldwater in one of the boats on such an excursion. A gentle west wind was blowing. The sea shimmered in the sunlight. A cloudless sky canopied the west for our sport. As I had made it a point never voluntarily to make an inch toward the east that I could avoid, at least they should not be able to charge me with a willful violation of the dead-lines regulation. I had with me only the boat's ordinary complement of men, 3 in all, and more than enough to handle any small power boat. I had not asked any of my officers to accompany me, as I wished to be alone, and very glad I am now that I had not. My only regret is that, in view of what befell us, it had been necessary to bring the 3 brave fellows who manned the boat. Our fishing, which proved excellent, carried us so far to the west that we no longer could see the Coldwater. The day wore on, until at last, about mid-afternoon, I gave the order to return to the ship. We had proceeded but a short distance toward the east, when one of the men gave an exclamation of excitement, at the same time pointing eastward. We all looked on in the direction he had indicated, and there, a short distance above the horizon, we saw the outlines of the Coldwater silhouetted against the sky. "They've repaired the engines and the generators both!" exclaimed one of the men. It seemed impossible, but yet it had evidently been done. Only that morning Lieutenant Johnson had told me that he feared that it would be impossible to repair the generators. I had put him in charge of this work, since he always had been accounted one of the best gravitation screen men in the Navy. He had invented several of the improvements that are incorporated in the later models of these generators, and I am convinced that he knows more concerning both the theory and the practice of screening gravitation than any living Pan American. At the sight of the Coldwater once more under control, the 3 men burst into a glad cheer. But, for some reason which I could not then account, I was strangely overcome by a premonition of personal misfortune. It was not that I now anticipated an early return to Pan America, and a board of inquiry, for I had rather looked forward to the fight that must follow my return. No, there was something else, something indefinable and vague, that cast a strange gloom upon me as I saw my ship rising farther above the water and making straight in our direction. I was not long in ascertaining a possible explanation of my depression, for though we were plainly visible from the bridge of the aero submarine, and to the hundreds of men who swarmed her deck, the ship passed directly above us, not 500 feet from the water, and sped directly westward. We all shouted, and I fired my pistol to attract their attention, though I knew full well that all who cared to have observed us. But the ship moved steadily away, growing smaller and smaller to our view, until at last she passed completely out of sight. End of chapter 1.